Hi, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. Kind of incredible. I managed to get the newsletter out on time the last 2 weeks, and here we are chatting about the newsletter. We're going to be talking about the June 3rd, 2026 newsletter that I sent out earlier today. If you're new here, the entirety of the newsletter is always linked in the description box down below. But this YouTube Live is an opportunity for me to chat with you about what my thoughts were in adding some of these stories, what's been going on in the industry, just to give you a little bit more color than the actual newsletter. The newsletter, I recognize, is difficult for people to read each week. I know it's just time consuming. You're all very busy. It's summer outdoor pool season. So if you're listening to this recording, thanks so much for being here. Thank you for giving this project a chance, and kick back while you're doing some other admin and check this one off your list, because I'm going to take you through what I thought was important in this week's newsletter. Each week, the newsletter starts with an op-ed. Most of you know that by now. This week, the start of the newsletter, I spent some time talking about NASA, the space agency, the idea of go fever. This idea came about recently for me because we have been watching the new Apple TV series Star City. If you are not familiar with that show, it is the parallel universe or the parallel perspective on the space race from a show called For All Mankind. For All Mankind has been on Apple TV for 5 seasons. The fifth season just concluded. We have really, really enjoyed For All Mankind up until the last season. Season 5 was terrible. Don't bother. But essentially, this is not a spoiler, but For All Mankind is a parallel history about the space race starting in the 60s. And almost from the first 10 minutes of the first episode, the whole impetus of the show is that the Russians, the Soviets, land on the moon first. JFK is not assassinated. All of these milestone events are completely flipped on their head. And we really enjoyed the show for the first 4 seasons. It is a period drama. So I love the costumes. I love the hair. I love the music, the setting. Kind of going back to the 60s and 70s, it progresses through several eras. My husband is into space exploration, so there's a lot of that. And it was a truly phenomenal show, a gem that people honestly aren't aware of because Apple TV is not something that everyone subscribes to. It's not as widely known in terms of programs as compared to something like a traditional network like CBS or Fox. So we were really excited to see that Star City recently started. It is releasing one episode a week, and it is from the Soviet perspective. So now it is kind of like getting to relive the show because they've gone back to the 60s as opposed to For All Mankind, which is up to, I want to say, the 2010s in the most recent fifth season. And the sixth season will be the final season. Star City is back in the 60s. The Soviets have landed on the moon first. And now where do they go from there? How does this tie into aquatics? I promise there's a reason I brought this up. So the reason I brought all this up is because of the idea of go fever. And I've just recognized that I didn't pull up the letter on the screen. So I've just done that now, or it's linked in the description box down below. But what is the idea of go fever? Let me come down to this quote that I found online. The term go fever was coined by NASA after the Apollo 1 fire in 1967. 3 astronauts died in a training exercise 2 weeks before Apollo 1 was scheduled to take off. A short in the electrical circuit sparked in the highly oxygenated air in the module, and within seconds, the entire module was engulfed in flames. Go fever refers to a desire to push forward and take chances when marginal or substandard conditions exist. It was found to be rampant at NASA and was fostered by a macho go hard or go home attitude of both the astronauts and management. In the newsletter, I do link to the trailer, season 1 trailer for Star City, and I would encourage you to watch it. Take 2 minutes, even if you have no interest in the show, because they basically lead into this idea of go fever as a problem within the Soviet structure as well as the American structure. And I'll be interested to see where the TV show takes us because I don't want to give any spoilers, but there has often been widely divergent plot lines in the For All Mankind US based series because it is an alternative history. Things that we remember or have learned about in school happening don't happen or they happen a different way. And so the thing I wanted to bring to your attention with Go Fever is I have been seeing this a lot very recently with new facility projects, older aquatic facility renovation or expansion projects. And honestly, I also see it in day to day aquatic operations where people just feel the need to keep the facility running at all costs, irrespective of logic or sensibility. And as I say in the certified pool operator class, pool operations is not brain surgery. You can close the pool. Nobody is going to die if you close the pool. Yes, your manager might be unhappy. Yes, you might have to compensate some customers or do some facility credits. Yes, you might get some bad reviews, but nobody ever got hurt or died because the pool was closed. And if you need the wording, I always tell operators you need to tell the customers that the service cannot be delivered safely, i.e., the water quality is not good enough for people to swim in, because the layperson just sees the water and they don't see the problem. But to bring it back to Go Fever, I have a friend who always says, rejection is redirection, right? One door closes, another opens, or there's reasons for everything. And I know not everyone feels that same fatalism, but I will say that in aquatics, I see a lot of organizations are guilty of not just pushing their team forward purposefully to help them grow, but there's also pushing ahead for no good reason other than a completely arbitrary deadline or because somebody wants to be first past the post or somebody doesn't want to lose face with the community or their boss or somebody doesn't want to be perceived to cede ground to competitors. It's completely arbitrary and we're talking about aquatics. We're not talking about tech or biomedical or, something really significant like a war. We're talking about pool operations. And so I really wanted to draw people into this idea that we all are subject to Go Fever. And I felt this yesterday in a situation where I went to an appointment where I was expecting certain information, and the information I received was not what I expected, did not slot in nicely in my calendar of how I want my life to be over the next, 6 to 18 months. And it was discouraging because I was thinking, well, how do I fix this? How do I make this deadline or this timeline continue, even though I've been told it's not going to work? And I was in Go Fever yesterday. It was the same thing. And I was completely irrational and trying to come up with ways to make something that makes no sense proceeding the way I had envisioned with the available resources that I have or information. I need more things to happen. I need to let it go. And even as somebody who's very flexible and very aware of these things, in the moment, I was very hot headed and frustrated. And today, the next day, after sleeping and thinking and having fresh perspective, whatever, we'll roll with it. No big deal. But I know a lot of you in aquatics, recreation, fitness, and facility operation in general, we do this to ourselves because we want to be good workers. We want to deliver the service to our ratepayers, to our members. We want to make people happy. We want to be amenable to their requests. And then we also layer on the customer service piece that our bosses expect a certain thing, our customers expect a certain thing. And it gets really, really complicated. But at the end of the day, I want to remind people that, you know, nobody's going to remember, our intention to do something. They're going to remember, what happened when something went really, really wrong. Right. So we might have an intent to accomplish something on a certain timeline. But if somebody gets hurt, somebody gets injured, something stupid happens, and we fail to execute something really, really badly, that's going to be remembered far more substantially, more significantly. And so I just want to encourage you this week in any sphere of your life, whether it's at home, it's at work, in other areas of your personal life, there's probably something you're obsessing over that you need to let go Or if you can't let it go, at least acknowledge that you are obsessing about it with a bit of NASA go fever, and just be aware that there may be consequences to that, and check back in on the topic or yourself and see if that's appropriate. When I do these op-eds in the newsletter, it is never my intention to give, like life advice or leadership advice. It's just always something that interests me, and I try and connect it back to what I'm experiencing. I don't think I have any more expertise to talk about these things than any of you listening or any of you reading or anybody else in the industry. But I do want to share these tidbits as they occur to me or as I experience them. So let me know in the chat box below or the comments below if you find this helpful or if you find it completely off base, because I have been sending out this newsletter for 2 years. We've been doing these audio recordings now for, I would say, 5 or 6 months. And my way is not the highway. There's lots of other ways we can adjust what I'm sending out each week and find out what you need in your work, what you want to hear in aquatics each week is really, really important to me. Next in the newsletter, I wanted to mention a article out of Columbus, Ohio regarding an infrastructure crisis and the community lacking funding to support their facility. And I really did not want to come across as a troll or rage baiting with this particular story. It was funny because last week we posted the toe turning technique for lifeguard at National Lifeguards removing victims from the pool. And oh my goodness, it was so controversial on the internet. I'm going to have to make a separate video about that. I posted it in the Facebook group Aquatic Managers and Directors, and it was not meant to be rage bait, but it certainly came across as rage bait just in the debate that it's stimulated and the comments and replies. And I'll get into that in another video probably in the next couple of days. But I really, I don't know everything about every community or organization that builds or manages, supports, or operates a pool. But I get really, really frustrated sometimes when I see these communities that have this infrastructure. And I think it comes from my own experience as a pool staff manager for a municipality where I was trained up by my council, by my administration, by my manager, director, CEO, CAO, that as a steward of ratepayer resources, I need to keep this facility alive. I need to responsibly spend resources so it doesn't break down. And I just find it so interesting and sad sometimes when I'm seeing these communities, they're folding and saying, we can't afford to operate the pool, or this is too expensive. And yes, it costs money, but just the perspective of a whole community losing that resource. Or the one I saw today, which is not in the June 3rd, 2026 newsletter. It will be in next week's newsletter. I just read the news today. The community of Trenton, Nova Scotia is closing their pool because there is a $50,000 operating deficit for the pool to run for 10 weeks each summer. And the mayor basically said in the news report, well, they can use the splash pad next door. And $50,000 is absolutely a lot of money. I don't have that money lying around to fund their pool. And a friend in Nova Scotia said, that community is dying. It's just a rural area. Of course, they don't have $50,000. But it just boggles my mind that $50,000 in the sense of a facility to operate for 2.5 months is not that much money. So I don't want to lose the plot on this week's newsletter, but it's just something I've been mulling over in my head where I'm really, really frustrated on behalf of these communities, on behalf of our industry. How did we get here? I don't know. How do we move forward? I don't know. But this infrastructure crisis is not going anywhere. And I almost want to say we now have an operational crisis where, like nobody would shut down a hospital that has a $50,000 operating deficit. Would they shut down a school that has a $50,000 operating deficit? I don't know. And I'm not a municipal legislative finance clerk by any stretch, but it's something that, irrespective of aquatics, like if it was pickleball or an ice rink, I think there would be more conversation. But because it's the pool and pool people are too nice, this is just not something on the docket, so to speak. I don't know. I'm still kind of working through my thoughts and feelings. So if you have perspective, please feel free to share it. I want these videos to be a conversation. We don't get a ton of comments. I know that's not everyone's thing on YouTube, but if you have a different opinion or perspective, please let me know because I do read the comments, I do reply, and I do want this to be an active conversation where I can incorporate feedback as I do in social media. When people DM me on Instagram or Facebook or send comments, I use that to adjust my thinking or inform my thinking. It's definitely valuable to me to have other perspectives. The next part of the newsletter is always the news that I've been reading and thinking about. This week, I made an effort to put in my own comments because last week I really only had kind of the news headings. But the newsletter did creep up to almost 2,000 words this week, which I know is a chunk of change for people to spend their time in a busy work week in the beginning of summer, really. Couple of different things that crossed my path this week. There was a report about lifeguard positions advertised, according to Indeed.com, have jumped 78% from this time last year. I really wish we had more raw data to understand that reporting because increasing the number of positions you post on Indeed does not necessarily correlate to an increased level of staffing or an increased level of positions or increased growth in the industry. Are more people posting on Indeed? Is it a different, job category? Is it, there's just too much for me to say what the article suggests, which is that the article suggests lifeguards are a bright spot in this summer's teen job market, which is the toughest in decades. Sorry, my brain got ahead of my, or sorry, my mouth got ahead of my brain in explaining the context if you're not looking at the screen. I shared an article pertaining to a new waiver process at a facility. It appears that one particular pool, Goodman Pool, forgive me, I don't recall what state this is in, they were having some issues with behavior. And so they're now going to require waivers and customer information on file. I think this is a good idea in principle, but in practice, I feel really bad for the aquatic staff members who are going to have to deal with that on the frontline basis. If you've ever worked at a pool in the summer, you've got kids, showing up on their own with change to access the pool. They're dropped off without supervision. To then have this requirement where waivers need to be signed and completed for them to access the pool. I understand why it needs to be done, but it does also feel like a barrier to participation that is difficult to implement and enforce this late in the season. If you had said back in February, hey, put this information into the town website or the recreation site website or what have you, we're going to import this data from other places. I think it could be reasonable, but it seems a bit late in the game to throw this out there, the week after Memorial Day. One of the articles I shared this week, which might feel a bit off track, but it spoke to the cost of filling your pool with water. Now, this article was geared towards residential homeowners. So you might be thinking, well, Katie, why did you include this when the focus of this newsletter and the work that Lakeview Aquatic Consultants does is commercial operations? One of the things I routinely see in the certified pool operator class is that people with smaller basins, so we're talking like 5 and 10 person hot tubs, 1 or 2 person cold plunges, 10-meter or 15-yard swimming pools, they get in the habit of thinking when the chemistry is off or the water is cloudy or foamy, their solution to pollution is dilution, i.e. draining the water. And that's not wrong in certain situations where the water is, expressly cloudy or algae or brown or foamy or high total dissolved solids, high turbidity. There are times that justify dilution. But for the vast majority of us with larger swimming pools, that's not cost efficient. And what I try to tell operators in class with smaller pools is that there's not no cost. You're just not seeing the cost immediately. There's always a cost to the water. There's a cost to your time to drain and refill. There's a cost to adding in the chemicals that you've removed and dumped down the drain. There's energy costs on the heater and how fast it has to work. Now, those costs are sometimes justifiable and they're part of operations, but there is not no cost to dilution. I also teach in the certified pool operator class that you should have the opposing chemical. If you have chlorine to go up, you should also have neutralizer to go down, right? If you have acid to bring pH down, you should also have soda ash to bring it up. People don't need to have huge amounts of both chemicals, but you should always have some of the opposing chemical if you're using the primary chemical. And that's a big gap I see, that people have one but not the other. So all I wanted to say with this as pool operators is that dumping water has a cost. Have I quantified that cost in terms of kilojoules and liters or cubits of water, um, chemical, staff time? Not recently. I've definitely done that in the past when there was diarrhea contamination in my municipal pool and we lost lessons, we lost staff wages, we lost revenue, and I had to quantify that for the swim team. It was almost $2,000. But I think people need to understand what their operating costs are. And running a swimming pool, we are Jacks and Jills of all trade. We're kind of like a business owner. We do a lot of different things depending on the day. And knowing your operating costs, your utility costs, even if you don't pay them, in the sense that municipalities internally may not bill you back for electricity or heat or water, but you need to know what that looks like, in my personal opinion. The Royal Life Saving Society in Australia is seeking members to create a national multicultural community advisory group. I was really happy to see this because here in Canada, we really struggle with all aspects of multiculturalism. We claim to be a mosaic versus a melting pot, but there continues to be pockets of racism and problems across Canada in certain regions in terms of behaviors associated with water safety and breaking cultural barriers where we can't make assumptions about people's water safety awareness, their knowledge, their swim skill level. And this brought me back to a conversation with Dr. Audrey Giles that I hosted during the pandemic. Some of you might know, some of you might not. I had a series of viral webinars called Pool Aid in 2020 and 2021. And when I say viral, I mean we had 450 people on some of those webinars live and over 25,000 hits on our website. So it was a big moment for Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. It was a bit gratifying in the sense that the work I had been doing for a long time in the industry was recognized by some pretty high profile brands and people. And I don't necessarily care when that happens, but it was appreciated that the work I do already was taken seriously, as opposed to some of you will have experienced over the years, just in general in aquatics, that there is still some level of misogyny. There's still some level of cliquiness or brand awareness. And so I was really proud to circle back to this webinar that I hadn't really thought about probably in 5 years. It's been 5 years. Dr. Audrey Giles is a full professor at U Ottawa, the University of Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada. And she has extensive research that she's done on Indigenous community approaches to water safety. Let me just click on the link and read you a little bit of the YouTube description. Whoops, sorry, this is going to be the wrong one, because I did just update the video description, and I think it really adequately explains kind of what the video is about. So if you listen to Dr. Audrey Giles, and this is not an aesthetic video at all, this is meant to be listened to. A lot of our content, as you probably know, is meant to be listened to. So for example, for me, I throw my videos up on the TV while I'm batch cooking or while I'm sweeping or cleaning my house or at the gym and I'm working out. You don't need to sit and watch the screen. If you're doing payroll, if you're doing staff scheduling, you're programming lessons, whatever that looks like. Dr. Audrey Giles shares her extensive research on water safety within Indigenous communities, particularly in the in the Arctic and subarctic regions. She highlights the cultural considerations that must be taken into account. Sorry, you guys can't see the display. I just realized. Can I bring it up? 1 second here. Yes, I can. Here we are. Extensive research on water safety within Indigenous communities, particularly in the Arctic and subarctic regions. She highlights the cultural considerations that must be taken into account when designing aquatic programs, the alarming statistics surrounding drowning and immersion fatalities, and the importance of cross-cultural communication in addressing these issues. That might not sound like anything, like, you could say that about any water safety initiative that is geared towards a specific community. However, what are the specifics that she gets into with Indigenous communities and water safety, right? So, what is the institutional racism present in aquatic leadership? And how do we need to be more inclusive in our approach to water safety education? She also discusses the impact of colonialism on health disparities in Indigenous communities, the role of masculinity in risk taking behaviors, and the importance of community engagement in developing effective water safety programs, including integrating cultural leaders and elders in water safety initiatives to make a far more effective approach. The way I would summarize this is basically the idea of life jackets being white. And that was something that was completely new to me when I met Dr. Wells and I listened to her research. And I'm so glad that she was willing to share her research with us. I think it came about that I had heard about it in the context of the Canadian Red Cross Swimming and Water Safety Program, RIP. And so I was so thrilled that she took, an hour of her time to present to those people who attended. And even if you don't have Indigenous communities in your area, thinking about how we can be culturally sensitive to specific perceptions of equipment like life jackets. Really, really encourage you to give this one a listen. It is so, so fascinating. I know I thought I was knowledgeable and I really wasn't. Some other articles I mentioned. Cleveland, Ohio is having some issues running their pools. There's a lot going on in that community as well in terms of infrastructure, operation, and funding. There is the city of Surrey, British Columbia, wants to follow in the footsteps of Vancouver to offer free swim lessons. You were probably here last week when you heard my pseudo rant regarding how unrealistic that is, given the modeling that I did very briefly. I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to see the initiative be successful, but I just don't see how that's going to be possible given the existing resources. I shared another article pertaining to something that was found on the internet saying that Meta AI glasses could be beneficial for people with disabilities. So that's just another piece of info to inform our discussion. What else in here that's interesting? A woman in Missouri was accused of pushing a 7-year-old child into a pool who did not know how to swim. Kansas City Water Park had a chemical leak. Another community, Middleton, I think it might have also been Ohio, opened their first pool since 2009, which means the community hasn't had a pool for 26 years, which is pretty shocking. I shared a really great interview about adult swim lessons in Oakland County, and this woman in the video hit the nail on the head for me. Adult swim lessons have a visibility issue. No program guides, no literature, no advertising ever showcases adults in swim lessons. Adults cannot envision themselves in swim lessons. They cannot see proof of adults succeeding in swim lessons. The visibility of swim lessons is a huge part of the reason that they don't have big uptake in a lot of facilities. I shared an article about an influencer who was banned by Six Flags for violating safety rules, eating chicken nuggets on a roller coaster. Why is this relevant to aquatics? There is always going to be, in the last few years, teenagers, young people who want to go viral whether it's the Tide Pod Challenge or the most recent one was like rushing through Scientology buildings in LA, getting viral clicks, getting that moment, becoming internet famous. Um, I think the people listening to this video are not going to do these types of things, but when you've seen kids jump off of roofs into backyard pools and it ends in disaster because the pool's not deep enough to account for that height, or any sort of viral, like parkour was a big one on TikTok for a couple of years, people scaling buildings and then falling off. And so, um, we don't see a ton of this yet in aquatics, but sometimes people are stupid and it's something to be aware of. Crystal Lagoons has come out with a mini lagoon, which I think is actually a product that people will be interested in using. I shared an article by Kate Connell from the Aquatic Professional website, AOAP. It's a blog post about strengthening soft skills for aquatic teams that was really good. Here in Alberta, a US diver who came up from California was able to retrieve the man from Pennsylvania, I believe, who drowned in Johnston Canyon a couple weeks ago. He jumped into the frigid waters and was a presumed drowning fatality because he was never seen again. Local divers and local emergency services were unable to retrieve his body because right now, May, June is spring runoff. It's very cold, very high water here in Alberta, southern Alberta. We had a ton of rain the last week, so very, very dangerous conditions. I know the family wanted their child's body recovered, but it was at what risk to other people. Norwegian Cruise Lines is moving ahead with the grand opening of their water park and their expanded private island. It's supposed to be opening in September, which is a couple months away. I'm super, super excited to see it. I'm scheduled to cruise, assuming there's good weather, assuming we can dock in January of 2027. I have not yet posted my vlog from Nassau Beach Club, Royal Caribbean's newer destination. I was there in February, Super Bowl Sunday, but it's been a lot. As I've shared in some past videos, we had some staffing changes in March. We have a new person that we trained. They've had some personal time off, some leave for unexpected things. So I've been doing my regular job and my admin job for a couple months, and it's been a challenge to get through backlogged videos. I just spent some time this past weekend. I released Icon of the Seas, the third video in that vlog. I have started the rough cut on Typhoon Lagoon, Walt Disney World, the daytime tour, and I started a rough cut on the World Water Park Association show at Coronado Springs. These are both from October 2025. I'm aware that they're going to be 8 months late, but we'll get there. So appreciate your patience. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're at all interested in any of this. We are so, so close to monetization, which is really, really important to me, not because we're going to get rich. We're probably going to make, like $2 a month based on being a very niche audience, but you are all very dedicated, and the number of subscribers and the watch time is where we're getting close, where I think at 2,710 hours, you need, no, 3,000? Yeah, you need 3,000. So we're getting really close. I've been working towards monetization for 6 years. You have to have a certain number of videos, subscribers, watch time. I won't bore you with the details, but it is going to be very, very important to have that. Gravitas is maybe too strong of a word, but that presence to be able to get more access to facilities and to be able to film more content. We can prioritize more content if we can show the value, if that makes sense. I don't want to start taking sponsors. I don't want to have paid ads in terms of wasting your time, but I do want to be able to document and track what we're doing with the YouTube channel, so to speak. This is old news because it happened almost right after last week's newsletter. Royal Caribbean has completely folded on Perfect Day Mexico, at least for now. I think they read the room, the political situation in Mexico. Nobody wants this right now. I feel bad in the sense that they have developed infrastructure. They did buy the port, the Costa Maya port. I believe it's Mahuacal. But there's been protests the last week. The president of Mexico Claudia, forgive me, I don't recall her last name, got involved. So I think they saw the writing on the wall and they folded pretty quickly. I have no doubt they will take these plans and buy land somewhere else. Some other country will invite them in very, very happily. So I don't feel bad for Royal Caribbean in that sense. They have a lot of other irons in the fire, so to speak. They have 3 or 4 other Icon class ships on order to be delivered by 2028. They recently announced the Discovery class ship, which I know for myself, I'm very excited as a frequent cruiser. It is going to be a smaller ship with a shallower draft, which means it can go to more exotic destinations. Because right now, those smaller ships that we love for those more interesting itineraries, those ships are getting old, right? 25, 30 years old. They need to be refreshed. And the bigger ships are lovely for certain experiences, but they can only go to big ports, so to speak. They're not going to go to smaller countries and smaller cities. Last couple of articles I shared, Matthew Perry's assistant was sentenced to jail for his role in the actor's drug overdose death. You might recall he drowned fatally in his outdoor hot tub. You might think, Katie, why are you including this in the newsletter? I'm an aquatic professional. I don't care about Matthew Perry. I think these stories are important for us to be aware of for water safety education. Adults think they can't drown in hot tubs, and I see this now with cold plunge. Intoxicants, whether it's drugs or marijuana, alcohol, medications, like it doesn't take much. Now, I understand in the case of Matthew Perry that he was injected with very high levels of drugs based on his addiction and what have you, but you can drown in relatively shallow water. We do need to recognize that. There's been more talk about one of the Mattel water parks, Open Air, which is a Canadian company that builds these glass domes with these retractable roofs. They have announced a partnership with Mattel for these water parks with American Resort Management, which I somehow missed that American Resort Management was going to manage them. I don't typically share press releases unless I think that they're actually relevant. And I think it is relevant to know that these Mattel water parks with the IP of things like Barbie and Risk and Sorry, and I think they own G.I. Joe as well, is going to be under a glass roof. So we'll see what that looks like. At the very bottom of this week's newsletter, I link to the very controversial video that I put out last week regarding the toe technique. I will save my thoughts and opinions on how that went down in the Facebook group for another video because I think it is indicative of our industry and some of the problems in our industry with people with strong opinions. Let's just leave it at that for today. And then, as always, I link back to the previous week's newsletter, the audio version, where I talk about the financial reality or lack of reality to fund free swim lessons in the city of Vancouver. Each week, these videos get longer and longer, and I really try and make them as fast as possible, but then also I trip over my words and I get excited and I have things I want to share because it's my hive mind. So if you've made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider sharing to colleagues who you think should also listen to this video. I will be back next week. I'll probably be back before then with some other content I'm working on. But yeah, it's just a little slow going at the moment, and that's okay. We will get there. I'm still at home for most of the summer as my husband's recovering from one surgery. We're waiting for the next surgery. It's interesting season of life. We haven't traveled since February, missing cruising, would love to go on an Alaska cruise in the next couple of weeks if I can make it happen. But I have some big project deadlines. He's got some recovery, and it's funny. When you don't travel, you do save money. So there is that at least. Saving money is like the adult thing to do. So that is it. Thanks for being here. I will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.